My name is Celeste Morrison. I'm 29, and last Thanksgiving dinner destroyed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. When my sister Jade stood up in front of our entire extended family and loudly announced Celeste needs to stop constantly asking us for money like some kind of charity case, I felt my world shatter. What she didn't know was that for the past 3 years I'd been secretly paying off her massive $52,800 credit card debt to save her marriage and reputation. The look of smug satisfaction on her face as our relatives nodded in agreement would haunt me forever, but what happened next would change our family dynamics permanently and serve justice in ways she never saw coming. Before we dive into this shocking family betrayal story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if you're ready for a wild ride of family drama that'll make your own relatives look like angels, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this tale of hidden debts and sweet revenge is just getting started. The story really begins 3 years ago when Jade called me crying at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night. She was hyperventilating through the phone, barely able to form words between her sobs. "Celeste, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine terror. "Marcus is going to leave me. He's going to take the kids. I don't know what to do." My heart immediately went out to her. Jade had always been the golden child in our family. The one who married her college sweetheart, had two beautiful children, and seemed to have the perfect suburban life that our parents constantly praised. Seeing her so broken was devastating. Through her tears, she confessed everything. She had been secretly gambling online for almost 2 years, starting small with just $20 bets on sports games. But like so many addiction stories, it spiraled completely out of control. She was chasing losses with bigger bets, using credit cards to fund her gambling, and had accumulated a staggering $52,800 debt across 4 different credit cards. Marcus found the statements, she sobbed. "He's talking about divorce, about taking Emma and Jake away from me. Celeste, I'll lose everything, the house, the kids, my entire life. Please, you have to help me." What made this situation even more heartbreaking was knowing Marcus's family background. His parents had gone through a bitter divorce when he was 12 because his father had hidden gambling debts from his mother. Marcus had sworn he would never put his own children through that trauma, and he had been very clear with Jade from the beginning of their relationship that gambling was an absolute deal-breaker for him. I was working as a senior software engineer at a tech company in Seattle at the time, making good money, and living quite modestly in a small apartment. I had been saving aggressively for a down payment on a house, and I had accumulated about $60,000 in my savings account over the past 5 years of careful budgeting and investing. Jade begged me to loan her the money, promising she would pay me back within 2 years maximum. She had a plan, she said. She would get a part-time job while the kids were in school, she would sell some of her jewelry and designer handbags, and she would cut all unnecessary expenses from their budget. She swore on our grandmother's grave that she had already deleted all gambling apps and blocked gambling websites from her devices. "I'll pay you back every single penny with interest," she promised through her tears. "You're saving my marriage, my children's home, their stability. I'll never forget this, Celeste." Against my better judgment and the nagging voice in my head telling me this was a terrible idea, I agreed to help her. The next day, I transferred $52,800 to her checking account, almost my entire life savings that I had worked so hard to build. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Instead of being grateful and working to rebuild our relationship and her life, Jade became increasingly distant and cold toward me. Within weeks of receiving the money, she started treating me differently at family gatherings. She would make subtle comments about my single status, my small apartment, my boring job in tech. When I would gently ask about her repayment plan or how she was doing with her recovery, she would become defensive and irritated. I said I'd pay you back, didn't I? Stop being so impatient. Rome wasn't built in a day, Celeste. Months turned into a year, and not only had I not received a single dollar back, but Jade had actually started asking me for additional small loans. $20 here for gas, $50 there for school supplies for the kids, $100 to cover a utility bill. Each time she promised it was temporary and would be included in her repayment plan. Meanwhile, I was struggling financially for the first time in my adult life. I had to move to an even smaller studio apartment to reduce my rent. I was eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches most days to stretch my grocery budget. I couldn't afford to go out with friends anymore, couldn't take vacations, and had to delay any major purchases like a car repair or new clothes for work. The most painful part was watching Jade continue to live her comfortable lifestyle. She was still getting her nails done every 2 weeks, still shopping at expensive grocery stores, still buying designer clothes for herself and the kids. When I mentioned that her lifestyle didn't seem to reflect someone who was seriously working to pay back a large debt, she became furious. "Are you keeping tabs on my spending now?" she snapped. "I have a family to take care of, Celeste. I can't just live like a monk because I owe you money. The kids need things, and I'm not going to make them suffer because of my mistakes." But the worst part was how she began portraying our relationship to our family. She started telling our parents and cousins that I was constantly asking her for money, that I was financially irresponsible and always struggling to make ends meet. She would make comments at family dinners about how some people need to learn better money management skills. Our mother, Patricia, started expressing concern about my financial situation. "Honey, Jade mentioned you've been having money troubles. Why didn't you come to us for help instead of burdening your sister?" I couldn't tell the truth without exposing Jade's gambling problem and potentially destroying her marriage. So I had to endure these conversations where my turns, if any. Family genuinely believed I was the one with financial problems. They started treating me like the family failure, the one who couldn't get her life together, couldn't manage money, couldn't be trusted with adult responsibilities. By the second year, Jade's behavior had become increasingly manipulative and cruel. She had completely rewritten the history of our relationship in her mind, and somehow I had become the villain in her story. At family gatherings, she would tell elaborate tales about how I was constantly calling her, asking for loans, how I had emotional outbursts when she couldn't help me financially, how she worried about my mental health because of my money obsession. The gaslighting was so thorough and convincing that even I started questioning my own memories sometimes. She would say things like, "Remember when you called me crying about your rent last month when I had never made such a call?" When I would contradict her, she would look at me with such genuine confusion and concern that other family members would give me worried looks. "Celeste, are you feeling okay?" my Aunt Karen asked me quietly at my cousin's birthday party. "Jade mentioned you've been having some memory issues lately, getting confused about conversations you've had." Meanwhile, Jade had not only failed to pay back any of the original debt, but she had actually borrowed an additional $3,200 from me throughout the year for various emergencies. Her car needed new tires, Emma needed expensive orthodontic work, their water heater broke. Jake needed money for a school trip to Washington, D.C. Each time she would approach me with tears in her eyes and a story about how this was truly the last time she would need to ask for help. "After this, I'll be able to focus completely on paying you back," the big amount she would promise. "This is just preventing a bigger financial disaster that would make it even harder for me to pay you back." I was living on credit cards myself by this point, struggling to keep up with my own basic expenses while continuing to subsidize her lifestyle. I had dark circles under my eyes from stress and lack of sleep. I had lost weight because I couldn't afford to eat properly. My hair was falling out from the chronic stress of financial insecurity. But what hurt the most was the complete absence of gratitude or acknowledgement from Jade. Not only did she not thank me for my sacrifices, but she actively resented me for the position she felt I had put her in. In her mind, I was holding this debt over her head like a sword controlling her life, making her feel guilty and ashamed. "You think you're so much better than me because you have money to lend," she said during one particularly heated phone conversation when I had asked about her repayment timeline. "Well, let me tell you something, Celeste. Money isn't everything. I have a husband who loves me, beautiful children, a real life. What do you have? A sad little apartment and a bank account that you worship." The irony was devastating. She was describing the life I had sacrificed my financial security to preserve for her, while criticizing me for the financial struggles that were a direct result of helping her. Things reached a breaking point during our family's annual summer barbecue at our parents' house. Jade had been drinking wine and was feeling particularly bold in front of our cousins and their spouses. She started telling a story about how I had called her begging for $500 to make my rent payment. "I felt so bad for her," Jade said, playing the role of the concerned, generous sister. "I mean, I have my own family to think about, but I couldn't let my sister become homeless. So Marcus and I decided to help her out, even though money is tight for us too, with the kids' activities and everything." I sat there in stunned silence as she spun this complete fabrication. In reality, I had been the one to lend her $500 just 2 weeks earlier when she claimed their air conditioning had broken and they needed emergency repair money. Our cousin David's wife, Jennifer, looked at me with such pity and concern. "Oh, Celeste, why didn't you say something? We could have helped too. It's so hard being single and trying to manage everything on your own." The conversation continued with various family members offering me financial advice, sharing stories about their own struggles during tough times, and praising Jade for being such a supportive sister despite her own responsibilities. Jade basked in the praise, nodding solemnly as people commended her generosity and family loyalty. That night, I went home to my tiny studio apartment and cried until I was physically exhausted. I looked at my bank statements and calculated that I was now $56, 0 inches debt myself between what I had lent Jade and the credit card debt I had accumulated trying to survive. I was trapped in a nightmare where I was drowning financially while being painted as a financial predator by the very person I had saved from ruin. I started documenting everything. I printed out bank transfer receipts, saved text message conversations, created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every dollar I had lent her and every lie she had told about our financial relationship. I didn't know what I was going to do with this information, but some instinct told me I would need proof of the truth someday. The psychological toll was becoming unbearable. I was having panic attacks about money, lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating my debt, wondering how I was going to dig myself out of this hole. I had always been a confident, successful person, but I was becoming a shadow of myself. Anxious, depressed, and completely isolated from my family, who all believed I was the problem. The third year was when Jade's manipulation reached truly sociopathic levels. She had become so comfortable with her version of reality that she started making increasingly bold and hurtful statements about my character and mental state. At our cousin Michelle's wedding, she pulled me aside and delivered what she probably thought was a compassionate intervention. "Celeste, I'm really worried about you," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This obsession with money isn't healthy. You're always talking about what people owe you, always keeping track of every little transaction. It's making everyone uncomfortable at family events." I stared at her in complete disbelief. "Jade, you owe me over $56,000. That's not a little transaction. She looked at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion and alarm. 56,000, Celeste, honey. I think you might be having some kind of breakdown. I borrowed maybe a few $100s from you over the years, and I've paid most of that back. You're talking like I owe you a mortgage payment or something. The gaslighting was so complete and delivered with such conviction that for a moment I actually wondered if I was losing my mind. But then I remembered the bank transfers, the screenshots, the documentation I had been keeping. I knew the truth even if she had somehow convinced herself of this alternate reality. I have bank records, Jade. I have proof of every transfer. Bank records of what? Those few times I asked for help with groceries or gas money. Celeste, you're starting to scare me. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about this. But here's where I realized just how calculated her behavior had become. Later that same evening, I overheard her talking to our mother about my concerning behavior. I think she might be having some kind of mental health crisis, Jade whispered to Mom while they were in the kitchen. She's claiming I owe her this huge amount of money that doesn't exist. She's becoming obsessive and paranoid. I'm worried she might be developing schizophrenia or something. Doesn't that usually manifest in your late 20s? I felt like I was living in a psychological thriller movie. The person I had sacrificed everything to help was now trying to convince our family that I was mentally ill because I expected her to acknowledge her debt. The audacity was breathtaking. This conversation motivated me to gather even more evidence. I started requesting official bank statements going back 3 years. I screenshot every text message conversation we had ever had about money. I created a timeline documenting every interaction, every lie, every manipulation. But the most devastating discovery came when I was going through old text messages and found something I had completely forgotten about. Shortly after I had first transferred the $52,800 to Jade, she had sent me a text message that said, "Thank you so much for saving my marriage and my family. I will never forget what you've done for me. I love you so much, Celeste. You're the best sister anyone could ask for." Reading that message while living in the reality she had created was like being stabbed in the heart. This was proof that she absolutely remembered and acknowledged the debt, that she had been grateful at one point, that she knew exactly what she was doing when she started rewriting our history. I also discovered something else that made my blood run cold. While going through my credit card statements, I noticed a charge at a casino in Las Vegas from 8 months earlier, during a weekend when Jade had told Marcus she was visiting me in Seattle. She had asked me to cover for her, claiming she needed a girls' weekend to clear her head and work on our relationship, but she hadn't visited me at all. She had gone to Vegas and gambled away money that probably came from one of the emergency loans I had given her that month. She had used me as her alibi while she fed her gambling addiction with my money, then came home and continued to portray me as the financial burden in our family. The pieces of her deception were becoming clearer, and I realized that I wasn't dealing with someone who had made mistakes and was struggling to recover. I was dealing with someone who was actively and maliciously manipulating every situation to her advantage while destroying my reputation and mental health in the process. I started to understand that the comments about my mental health weren't just casual cruelty. They were strategic. If she could convince our family that I was having psychological problems, then my eventual confrontation about the debt would be dismissed as delusions or lies. She was systematically undermining my credibility so that when the truth came out, no one would believe me. The revelation made me physically sick. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a person I loved and trusted, orchestrating the complete destruction of my relationships with my family, my sense of reality, and my mental health. The betrayal was so deep and so calculated that I knew there was no possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. That's when I decided it was time to stop being the victim in this story and start planning my response. She had been playing chess while I was playing checkers, but now I understood the game. And I was going to make sure that justice was served in the most public and undeniable way possible. I want to take a moment here because I know some of you watching might be dealing with family members who are manipulating or gaslighting you. If any of this sounds familiar, please know that you're not crazy, your feelings are valid, and documentation is your best friend. Keep reading because what happened next proved that sometimes patience and evidence can lead to the most satisfying justice. Once I understood the true scope of Jade's manipulation, I knew I needed to be just as strategic in my response. I couldn't simply confront her directly because she had already laid the groundwork to paint me as mentally unstable and financially obsessed. I needed a plan that would expose her lies in a way that was undeniable and public enough that she couldn't spin the narrative in her favor. I started by consulting with a lawyer about my options. Attorney Michael Chen listened to my story with growing amazement and helped me understand that what Jade had done wasn't just morally wrong, it was potentially criminal fraud. The deliberate deception about repayment, the continued borrowing under false pretenses, and the defamation of my character could all have legal consequences. You have excellent documentation, Michael told me after reviewing my evidence. These bank transfers, text messages, and timeline create a clear picture of intentional fraud. But before we go the legal route, you might want to give her one final opportunity to make this right voluntarily. That's when I hatched the perfect plan. Thanksgiving was coming in 6 weeks, and our entire extended family would be gathered at our parents' house as always. This would be the ideal setting for what I had in mind, a captive audience of everyone who had believed Jade's lies about me. I spent those 6 weeks preparing meticulously. I created a professional presentation with copies of bank statements, text message, screenshots, and a detailed timeline of events. I had everything printed and organized in folders for each family member present. I even prepared a written statement that laid out the facts clearly and calmly. But more importantly, I set a trap. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I called Jade and told her I was having a serious financial crisis. I explained that I was behind on my rent, my credit cards were maxed out, and I was in danger of having my car repossessed. I asked if there was any way she could help me with a loan of just $500 to get through the month. "Celeste," she said, with exaggerated patience, "I've told you before that I can't keep lending you money. Marcus and I have our own responsibilities. You need to learn to manage your finances better, instead of always turning to family when you get in trouble." Perfect. I recorded the conversation. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I sent her a text message explaining my dire situation in more detail and asking if she could at least acknowledge the money I had lent her over the years, so I could use that as collateral for a bank loan. Her response was exactly what I had hoped for. "What money, Celeste? I think you're confusing our relationship with someone else's. You've never lent me any significant amount of money. Please stop with these fantasies." I screenshot that immediately. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I played my final card. I called my mother and had a carefully scripted conversation where I expressed concern about Jade's comments about my mental health. I told Mom that I was confused because I clearly remembered lending Jade money over the years, but she was saying it never happened. "Maybe I am having memory problems," I said sadly. "But Mom, I have bank statements that show transfers to Jade. What if I bring them to Thanksgiving dinner so the whole family can help me figure out what's real? Maybe everyone together can help me understand what's happening to my mind." Mom, bless her heart, thought this was a wonderful idea. "Of course, honey. We all love you and want to help. If you're having memory issues, we'll get to the bottom of it together as a family. When Mom called Jade to give her a heads up about my memory problems and my plan to bring bank statements to dinner, Jade's response was predictable. She told Mom that she was worried about my delusions becoming public and embarrassing me, but that she supposed the family needed to see how serious my mental health issues had become. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Meanwhile, I was also working on rebuilding my own financial situation. I had finally stopped lending Jade money, which allowed me to start paying down my credit card debt. I had taken on some freelance programming projects in my spare time to generate extra income. Slowly but surely, I was clawing my way out of the financial hole that helping Jade had created. I also started seeing a therapist to help me process the emotional trauma of being systematically manipulated and gaslit by someone I loved. Dr. Sarah Martinez helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of psychological abuse, and that my desire for justice and vindication was completely normal and healthy. What your sister has done is deeply damaging, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically, Dr. Martinez explained. The gaslighting, the isolation from family support, the character assassination. These are techniques used by abusers to maintain control over their victims. Having a professional validate my experience was incredibly healing. For so long, I had started to doubt my own perceptions and memories because Jade's manipulation was so consistent and convincing. But Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my documentation and evidence weren't signs of obsession. They were survival mechanisms that had probably saved my sanity. The night before Thanksgiving, I barely slept. I was nervous but also excited. For 3 years, I had watched Jade receive praise and sympathy for being a generous, supportive sister, while I was painted as a selfish, unstable burden. Tomorrow the truth would finally come to light. I thought about that text message Jade had sent me 3 years ago. "Thank you so much for saving my marriage and my family. I will never forget what you've done for me." Well, she was right about one thing. She would never forget what happened next. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and cold, which felt oddly appropriate for what was about to unfold. I arrived at my parents' house early to help with dinner preparations, carrying an innocent-looking canvas bag that contained copies of 3 years' worth of evidence: bank statements, text message, screenshots, email, printouts, and detailed timeline documents. Jade arrived fashionably late with Marcus and the kids carrying expensive wine and wearing a new cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She hugged everyone warmly, playing the role of the beloved family member she had worked so hard to maintain. During dinner, the atmosphere was pleasant and family typical. Discussions about work, the kids, school activities, holiday plans, and family gossip. I participated normally, even complimenting Jade on the beautiful cranberry sauce she had brought. She smiled at me with what appeared to be genuine warmth, probably feeling confident that she had successfully managed the family narrative for another year. After the main course, while people were lingering over coffee and preparing for dessert, my mother stood up and cleared her throat. "Before we have pie, Celeste has something she wanted to share with all of us," Mom announced with a concerned but supportive smile. "She's been having some memory issues lately and wants our help figuring out some financial records that are confusing her." I could see Jade's eyes flash with satisfaction. This was going exactly as she had expected. I was about to publicly humiliate myself by presenting delusional evidence of loans that had never happened, proving to everyone that I was mentally unstable. "Thank you, Mom," I said, standing up and retrieving my bag. "I really appreciate everyone's support. I've been so confused lately about my finances, and Jade has been very patient with me, even though my memory problems have been affecting our relationship." I began distributing folders to each adult family member around the table. I've organized some financial documents, and I'm hoping you can all help me understand what's real and what might be me misremembering things. Jade was still smiling confidently as people opened their folders. Of course, I'll help you understand, Celeste. We all want to get to the bottom of this. Uncle Robert was the first to speak up as he examined the bank statements. Celeste, these show a transfer of $52,800 to Jade's account 3 years ago. That's a very large amount. I nodded, looking confused and vulnerable. I know, Uncle Robert. I have this clear memory of helping Jade with a debt problem, but she says it never happened. Maybe I'm misremembering what this transfer was for. All eyes turned to Jade, whose confident smile was beginning to crack around the edges. Well, that might have been. I'm not sure what that specific transaction was for. My cousin David was flipping through pages of text message screenshots. Jade, there are several messages here where you're thanking Celeste for saving your marriage and promising to pay her back. You say, I will never forget what you've done for me. Everyone was now carefully examining their folders, and I could see the exact moment when the reality of the situation began to dawn on various family members. Aunt Karen looked up with a shocked expression. There are dozens of additional transfers here. $500, $200, $800. Jade, these are all going to your account. Marcus, who had been quietly reviewing the documents, suddenly went very pale. Jade, what is this about debt problems? What marriage were you trying to save? That's when Jade's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass and sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. This is ridiculous, she shouted. Celeste is having a mental breakdown and creating fake documents to support her delusions. Can't you see that she's sick? But my grandfather, who had been silently reading through the timeline I had created, looked up with the sharp intelligence that had made him a successful businessman for 60 years. Jade, he said quietly, these bank records have official letterheads and account numbers. Are you suggesting that Celeste somehow fabricated 3 years of Wells Fargo bank statements? The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of Jade's increasingly panicked breathing. Marcus was now standing as well, his face red with anger and what looked like dawning horror. Jade, the $52,000. That's the exact amount you told me you had paid off with your inheritance from Great Aunt Dorothy. You said the gambling debt was gone. Oh, this was even better than I had hoped. You're still gambling, Marcus continued, his voice rising. After everything we went through, after the promises, the therapy, the second chance I gave you, Jade's eyes were darting frantically around the room, looking for allies, for escape routes, for any way to regain control of the situation. But there was nowhere to run from 3 years of meticulously documented evidence spread across the dining room table. Marcus, I can explain, she began, but he was already gathering the children's coats. No, he said firmly. I can't do this again. I won't put Emma and Jake through this again. We're leaving. As Marcus hurried the confused children toward the door, promising them they would understand when they were older, the rest of my family sat in stunned silence, still processing the magnitude of Jade's deception. Finally, my mother spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Jade, is this true? Did you take $53,000 from your sister and then lie to all of us about it? What happened next was 3 hours of the most emotionally intense family confrontation I have ever witnessed. Once Jade realized that her lies were completely exposed and there was no way to spin the narrative back in her favor, something inside her seemed to break. All the manipulation, all the fake concern, all the carefully crafted victim persona just disappeared. What emerged was someone I barely recognized. The sister I thought I knew had been a complete fabrication. The real Jade was cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse for the pain she had caused. "Fine," she said, slumping back into her chair after Marcus left with the children. "Yes, I took the money. Yes, I lied about it. But you have no idea what kind of pressure I was under. Do you know what it's like to live up to everyone's expectations of being the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother?" My father, who had been silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. "So you decided to destroy your sister's life instead of getting help?" "I didn't destroy anything," Jade snapped back. "Celeste is fine. She's always been fine. She doesn't have a husband or children to worry about. She can afford to help family." The selfishness and entitlement in that statement took everyone's breath away. Even after being caught in 3 years of elaborate lies, she still couldn't understand why what she had done was wrong. My mother was crying now, not just from sadness, but from what looked like genuine grief. "How could you let us believe that Celeste was the one with problems? How could you let us treat her like she was irresponsible when she was sacrificing everything to help you?" Jade shrugged. "I didn't make you believe anything. You drew your own conclusions." That's when my cousin David, who had always been protective of me, stood up and pointed at Jade. "You're a sociopath. Do you understand that normal people don't do this to their family?" The confrontation continued for hours. Various family members expressed their shock, their anger, their disappointment, and their guilt for having believed Jade's lies about me. Apologies were offered, tears were shed, and promises were made to make things right. But the most satisfying moment came when my grandfather pulled out his checkbook and wrote me a check for the full amount I had lent Jade. $56,000, including the additional loans. "I won't have my granddaughter suffering because of another granddaughter's selfishness," he said firmly. "Jade can pay me back with interest." Jade's face went white. "Grandpa, I can't possibly." "Then you'll figure it out," he interrupted. "Get a job, sell your things, downsize your lifestyle. I don't care how you do it, but you will pay back every penny." Within 6 months, the consequences of that Thanksgiving dinner had completely transformed our family dynamics. Marcus filed for divorce and was awarded primary custody of the children after Jade's gambling addiction and financial deception became part of the court record. Jade had to sell her house, her car, and most of her possessions to begin paying back my grandfather. She was also forced to get a job for the first time in her adult life, working retail at a department store, making $12 an hour while trying to rebuild her life from scratch. The woman who had once looked down on me for my boring tech job was now asking customers if they wanted to apply for store credit cards. But perhaps the most poetic justice was that her reputation in our family and social circle was completely destroyed. All those people she had manipulated into believing I was the problem now knew the truth. The community that had once praised her as a devoted wife and mother now whispered about her gambling addiction and the way she had betrayed her sister. Meanwhile, my life began to transform in positive ways I hadn't expected. With my grandfather's check, I was able to pay off all my debt and even put a down payment on a small house. The weight of financial stress that had been crushing me for 3 years was finally lifted. More importantly, I had learned valuable lessons about boundaries, self-advocacy, and the importance of documentation when dealing with manipulative people. The experience made me stronger, more confident, and much better at recognizing red flags in relationships. I also started speaking publicly about financial abuse and family manipulation, helping other people who were going through similar experiences. Through support groups and online forums, I connected with dozens of people who had been financially exploited by family members and then gaslit about their experiences. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what I had experienced was actually quite common. Family financial abuse often involves the same patterns: initial crisis and plea for help, gradual escalation of borrowing, character assassination of the victim, and gaslighting to maintain control of the narrative. Your documentation and strategic response probably saved not just your finances, but your sanity, she told me. Many people in your situation never get justice because they can't prove what happened to them. Looking back now, 2 years after that pivotal Thanksgiving dinner, I can honestly say that while the betrayal was devastating, the outcome taught me more about my own strength and resilience than any positive experience could have. I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most, and that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I also learned that justice doesn't always come in the form you expect, but when it does come, it's incredibly sweet. Jade's attempt to destroy my reputation and relationships ultimately exposed her own character to everyone who mattered. Her plan to manipulate the family into supporting her while ostracizing me backfired so completely that she lost everything she was trying to protect. Today, Jade and I have no relationship. She's never apologized for what she did, and I've never asked for an apology because I don't believe it would be genuine. She's still paying back my grandfather, still working retail, still dealing with the consequences of her choices. Sometimes family loyalty means enabling destructive behavior, but real family love sometimes requires holding people accountable for their actions. That Thanksgiving dinner was the most painful but also the most liberating day of my life. So, here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? How do you handle situations where the people closest to you are the ones causing you the most harm? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all feel less alone in dealing with difficult family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and justice stories. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with family financial abuse. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. And remember, documenting everything isn't paranoia, it's protection. Thank you for watching my family revenge journey, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. Take care of yourselves out there, set those boundaries, and never let anyone make you question your own reality. Until next time.